Okay, so today we're gonna dive into something pretty big, pretty profound.
Yes.
I mean, we're talking about religious experience.
Right.
And, you hear that phrase tossed around a lot,
Mm-hmm.
but when you really try to like get a philosophical grip on it,
Yeah.
it can get kind of slippery.
Yeah.
Like what is it exactly that makes it more than just like a really strong feeling or some weird thing that happens?
Exactly.
That's what we really want to try to unpack today.
That's the mission here.
Yes.
Yeah, for this deep dive.
So we're going to be looking at what makes something count as a religious experience, where it overlaps, and also where it kind of diverges from other ideas that sound similar, and most importantly, I think for us thinking about it philosophically,
Yeah.
what are the big philosophical debates about what religious experience is, whether it's even valid in some way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the source material that we're using for this, it's this really, really in-depth article from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Ooh, yeah, a classic.
Which if you've ever read anything from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, it's not light reading.
It can be dense.
Very dense.
Very thorough, very carefully argued.
Meticulously researched.
Yes.
And we're going to try to distill it for you, our listener.
That's right.
Into something that's a little bit more digestible, a little bit more engaging.
Yeah, make it a conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe the best place to start is to just kind of put it out there. Like what actually is a religious experience?
Well, at its most basic level, it's an experience that seems to the person having it to be a genuine encounter with something, some objective reality that has religious meaning, religious significance for them.
Right.
And, what's really fascinating for a philosopher is that thing that they're encountering, it can take so many different forms.
Right.
It could be, the classic personal God, like in a lot of the Abrahamic faiths.
Mm-hmm.
But it could also be some kind of ultimate state of being.
Right.
Some fundamental truth about the universe.
Yeah.
Or even, in some traditions, it might be like a profound sense of absence.
Right, like a void.
Or emptiness, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily about, having a vision or hearing voices or anything like that.
Yeah.
It can be much more, subtle than that.
Yeah.
And varied.
So it sounds like it doesn't have to be purely sensory either.
No, not at all.
It could be like an intellectual or an emotional realization that someone then interprets as connecting them to something bigger.
Yeah.
That's religiously important to them.
Yeah, that's right.
Like they've had this breakthrough that they see as having this kind of religious significance.
Right. And you've actually hit on a really, really crucial point there.
Oh, okay.
Which is this role of interpretation.
Okay.
The way that an experience is understood is always going to be shaped by what the person already believes.
Right.
And by the doctrines and the teachings of their particular religious tradition.
Right.
So there's always going to be that lens that they're looking through.
Right. So two people could have like objectively the same experience.
It's possible.
But because of their backgrounds or their beliefs, they interpret it in totally different ways.
Yeah.
And one might say, oh, this was religious, and the other one says, no, it wasn't.
Exactly.
That makes it so tricky to define.
It does. And the article actually reminds us that even just defining religion is a notoriously difficult task for philosophers.
Yeah.
So when you add experience to that, it gets even more complicated.
It's layers upon layers of complexity here.
Yeah.
So where do we even begin to like unravel this?
Well, the article does a really nice job of kind of breaking it down step by step.
Okay.
And one of the first distinctions that it makes is between religious experience and just religious feelings.
Okay, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that seems like a really crucial distinction for a philosopher who's trying to analyze this stuff.
Right, because you have to be precise about your terms.
Yeah.
So how do they make that distinction?
Well, they give a really helpful analogy.
Okay.
They say, imagine you're feeling happy.
Okay.
Just a general sense of happiness. That doesn't automatically mean that you are, perceiving a happy person
right.
who's causing that happiness.
Right.
In the same way, you could be meditating and you might have this really intense feeling of peace.
Mm-hmm.
But that by itself
right.
doesn't necessarily make it a religious experience.
Right, right.
In the sense that we're talking about.
Okay, so it's not just the feeling itself. There has to be something more.
Or does, yeah.
So is it like the ofness of it?
Yeah, exactly.
Like the feeling has to be directed towards something that's believed to be like religiously significant.
Exactly.
Like I'm feeling peace, but that peace is directed towards, I don't know, God or the universe or...
Yeah, or Brahman or
Nirvana.
Yeah, or emptiness.
Yeah. So there's this... there's this kind of intentionality to it that makes it more than just a random feeling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
And, this idea that there's this of-ness to religious experience,
right.
It actually goes back to some really important early thinkers on religion.
Okay.
Like Schleiermacher.
Oh, yeah.
He talked about the feeling of absolute dependence.
Right. As being at the heart of religious experience.
Okay.
And then Rudolf Otto.
Yeah.
He described this powerful feeling of the numinous,
right? Yeah,
which is this kind of awe-inspiring, mysterious sense of something wholly other,
right?
And they were really important, these guys, because they really highlighted how central the inner life is to understanding religion, right?
Yeah,
but later philosophers, people like Yellman and Alston, they've argued that just focusing on these feelings doesn't quite capture the full picture of what's going on in religious experience.
Right.
There needs to be something more than just a feeling.
Right.
There often seems to be a sense of encounter with something that is presented to the person.
Okay, so it's almost like a sense of, I don't know, like receptivity.
Yes.
Like something is being given to you, as opposed to just like something welling up
exactly
inside of you.
Yeah, it's not just a projection of your own feeling.
Right.
There's a sense that something is impinging on you in some way.
Okay, and this is important because obviously, as we know, powerful feelings can come from all sorts of sources.
Exactly.
So we need a way to distinguish the ones that are, genuinely religious from the ones that are, maybe just psychological or whatever.
Yeah, and to really understand religious experience as experience, we have to look beyond just, feelings and emotions.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So the article also talks about this distinction between religious experience and mystical experience.
Right.
And, those terms get thrown around a lot.
Yeah, interchangeably.
Yeah, like they're almost synonymous in popular culture.
Yeah, definitely.
But are they actually different?
Yeah, good question.
When we're thinking about this, philosophically.
Yeah, that's a really key point.
Yeah.
And, it is tricky.
Yeah.
Because there's definitely overlap.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Like all mystical experiences, I think you could safely say, are also religious experiences.
Okay.
But not all religious experiences are mystical.
Right.
Right.
So it's kind of like squares and rectangle.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah, there you go.
So what is it that makes something specifically mystical then?
Well, even the definition of mysticism is debated among scholars.
Okay.
William James, for instance.
Yeah.
He thought that ineffability was like a key feature of mystical experience.
Okay.
Which, some people say, well, that would rule out some things that we usually call mystical.
Right.
Alston had a more kind of technical way of defining it.
Okay.
But in general, I think when we talk about mysticism, what we often mean is either like a particular religious system or a deliberate practice.
Right.
That's aimed at reaching some kind of realization.
Okay.
It might be unity with the divine.
Yeah.
It might be direct insight into the ultimate nature of reality.
Yeah.
Or some other kind of, profound religious understanding.
Right.
But it's something that you're actively trying to cultivate.
Right. So you're doing it intentionally.
Yeah.
You're putting in the effort.
Yeah, it's like a discipline.
Yeah.
A practice.
Yeah.
That you're engaging in.
Okay, so that's different from like the classic stories.
Exactly.
Like St. Paul on the road to Damascus.
Right. That classic conversion experience.
Yeah. Or Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita having this like vision of Krishna.
Yeah. Or Moses in the burning bush.
Right. Or the revelations that Muhammad received. Those weren't things that they were like actively trying to make happen.
No, these were often spontaneous, unbidden events.
Right. So that's where the distinction comes in.
Yeah. So you can have these kind of unexpected, unplanned religious experiences that aren't necessarily the result of some mystical practice.
Okay. So religious experience is kind of the bigger umbrella term.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so the article goes on to talk about different types of religious experience.
Yes.
And this is where it gets really interesting because it starts to show just how many different ways people actually have these experiences.
It's a huge variety.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
So what are some of the main categories that we see here?
Well, one really common one is visual or auditory experiences.
Okay.
Visions and auditions.
Okay.
But the key thing here is that they're not
right.
They're not experienced through the physical senses.
Right. Okay.
So people talk about seeing things or hearing things, but they're very clear that it's not.
Yeah.
With your physical eyes or ears.
Right. So it's more like an inner vision.
Yeah, like an inner voice.
Yeah, or an image in the mind's eye or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, someone coming from a naturalistic perspective might say, well, that's just a hallucination.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But the people who have these experiences, they often insist that they have this real quality to them.
Yeah.
Like they're actually perceiving something real.
Right.
Through some kind of spiritual analog of sight or hearing.
Right. Yeah.
So it raises all these questions about, what even is perception?
Right.
And how do we distinguish, real perception from illusion?
Yeah. And it's interesting because that question of how much our internal experiences actually like track onto external reality. I mean, that's a huge question in philosophy in general.
It is. It's a classic problem.
Yeah. Okay, so what other types of religious experience does the article talk about?
Well, there's another category where they use this language of seeing.
Okay.
But in a more metaphorical sense.
Okay.
So it's like a profound realization or insight that someone has.
Okay.
So, think about like a yogi who achieves this state of understanding.
Yeah.
Where they say they can see their identity with Brahman,
right,
or Buddhists who talk about seeing things as they truly are, when they reach enlightenment, and it's not just an intellectual grasp of a concept,
right?
It's much deeper than that.
Yeah.
It's like a really transformative understanding, that has this experiential weight to it.
Yeah.
It was like a shift in perception.
Right. It's like they're seeing the world in a completely new way.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it's not through their physical eyes.
Wait, it's not sensory in the usual way.
Right.
But it has that kind of force to it.
Right. Okay. And then there are also experiences that are mediated through our ordinary senses.
Yeah. So you might have someone who experiences a deep sense of the divine when they're contemplating, the beauty of nature, the vastness of the cosmos, or even just, the intricate detail of a flower.
Right.
And in those cases, someone else might look at the exact same thing and not have that religious interpretation.
Yeah. So it's the same input, but one person is layering on this religious meaning.
Yeah, exactly.
That the other person isn't.
And they might even think the other person is crazy.
Right.
Yeah. But for the person having the experience, it's very real.
Right.
They're seeing, a deeper reality through that ordinary object.
Okay. Yeah.
And then you've got the flip side of that, where the thing that's being perceived is considered to be religiously significant.
Okay.
So, Moses and the burning bush.
Right.
Or stories of the Buddha levitating.
Right. Or miracles.
Yeah, miracles, exactly.
Yeah.
Whether the people witnessing them would actually use that word or not.
Right, right.
But there's this sense that
Yeah.
something extraordinary is happening.
That violates the laws of nature.
Yeah, that goes beyond the normal.
Yeah, okay.
And then you've got this whole other category of
Ah.
experiences that are really tough
Okay.
to get a handle on.
Okay.
And those are the ineffable experiences. You know, where the person says, I had this direct awareness of something really real, something religiously significant.
Yeah.
But I can't even describe it.
Right.
You know, words just don't do it justice.
Yeah, yeah.
It's beyond language.
Okay, so those are particularly challenging.
They are.
For philosophers.
Yeah, because how do you even begin to analyze something that can't be put into words?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And then just to kind of round things out, the article also mentioned some other ways that people have categorized religious experiences.
Okay.
So William James, for instance, he distinguished between what he called healthy-minded and sick-minded religious temperaments.
Okay.
And the types of experiences that tend to go along with those.
Okay.
And then you've got Yondell.
Okay.
Who came up with these categories based on the content of the experience.
Okay.
So, you know, like monotheistic experiences or nirvanic experiences.
Right, or experiences of liberation.
Yeah, experiences of unity with the cosmos.
Right, right.
So there are lots of different ways to slice and dice this phenomenon.
Okay, so it really is a diverse landscape.
Yeah, very much so.
Of experiences.
Yeah.
And that makes it even more complicated.
It does.
to try to get a handle on it.
Right. But it also makes it really fascinating.
Yeah.
I think. You know, to see just how rich and varied human experience can be.
Yeah. Okay, so the article then moves on to talk about language and religious experience.
This is a big one.
And this seems like a really crucial area for philosophers because philosophers are all about like meaning and reference and how language works.
Exactly. How do we even talk about these things?
Yeah, and so the question here is can religious language even be meaningful in a cognitive sense? Yeah,
does it actually refer to anything real?
Yeah, and there's this whole debate about that.
There is, yeah.
And I remember the logical positivists.
Yeah,
like they had some pretty strong opinions on this.
Oh yeah, they were very adamant.
Yeah,
that religious language was meaningless.
Right. They basically said, for a statement to be meaningful, it has to be verifiable.
Yeah, through our senses.
Through sense experience. Yeah. And because, you know, religious experiences and transcendent realities and all that.
You can't touch them.
You can't see them.
You can't measure them.
Yeah. They said, well, those claims are just metaphysical.
Yeah, empty.
Yeah, and therefore meaningless.
Right.
Like they're not even making a meaningful claim.
And, you know, I think it's important to remember just how radical that was at the time. Yeah. You know, it was a real challenge to the whole way that people have been talking about religion for centuries.
And A.J. Ayer was one of the big proponents of this.
Oh, yeah. He was a forceful advocate for that view.
Yeah. But of course, you know, no philosophical view is without its problems.
Of course not.
Right.
Yeah.
And the verification principle itself faced some pretty serious criticism.
Right. So, I mean, the main one was that how do you verify the verification principle?
Right. It's self-referentially incoherent.
Yeah, it undercuts itself.
Yeah.
So that was a big problem.
Yeah. Right.
And then other thinkers came along and said, well, maybe what's important is not verifiability, but falsifiability.
Right. So can you prove it false?
Yeah, like in principle. Yeah. Can you imagine what it would take to show that this claim is wrong?
Right.
And Karl Popper was a big proponent of that view.
Okay.
And then other people said, well, maybe you need both.
Right.
You need some combination of verifiability and falsifiability.
Yeah, okay.
For a statement to be meaningful.
Right.
But the article points out that if you set the bar that high, you're going to end up ruling out a lot of other types of language that we generally accept as meaningful.
Yeah, like ethical statements.
Yeah.
Or claims about history.
Or even just like, you know, other people's minds.
Right, yeah.
We can't directly observe those.
Yeah.
But we we still talk about them.
Right.
And we think it's meaningful.
Yeah, to do so.
And the article makes this really important point.
Yeah.
That saying religious language is meaningless.
Right.
Because it doesn't fit these models of meaning that are based on
empirical observation.
Yeah. That's kind of assuming the conclusion.
Yeah, it's begging the question.
Yeah.
It's assuming that religious experiences aren't a valid form of experience that could actually ground meaningful language.
Right. So you're already ruling out
the
possibility before you even start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of a problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are some other ways of thinking about this relationship between language and religious experience?
Well, some people have said that maybe the meaning of religious language is not about, asserting facts about the world.
Okay.
But it's about something else.
Okay.
So Braithwaite, for example. Okay.
He argued that religious claims are really just expressions of moral commitments and intentions.
Okay.
Rather than factual statements about God.
So when someone says God is love,
right,
they're not actually describing a being.
Yeah, they're not saying there's some dude up there who is love.
They're expressing a commitment.
Yeah, they're saying I'm committed